let's start with influenza. Of course, we know influenza as the flu, and this is one that we are probably pretty familiar with because some of you have had it. And it is also airborne. Now, I don't need to tell you about flu symptoms because you've all been there. It starts with a headache, and you get muscle aches. Your throat can get sore. You may have a cough, but generally you feel really, really bad, and it's really hard to get out of bed when you have the flu. This is historically, if you look over to the right, one of your great killer diseases, and there was a pandemic in 1918, and it is the one virus up to date that has killed more people than any of the other viruses. I think the video that y'all would have seen in class said that it killed more people than actually died in World War II. But it is one of the diseases we're probably the most familiar with. Now, influenza does have a vaccination, and hopefully we went through that. You should have all been vaccinated for the flu. If not, and you got the flu, you know what I'm talking about with the symptoms. Every year, the CDC, which stands for the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, and USAMRIID, that's USRAMID, and it stands for United States Research and Development Center in that's USAMRIID in Bethesda, Maryland. They're the two big infectious disease centers, get together and they try to figure out for the year which flu strain is going to be the worst. And that's going to be the worst for really young children and the worst for the elderly. Now, flus, because they don't have scientific names, they're given a name a lot of time for the region or where they came from. So right now you may have known of the swine flu. Obviously that started in pigs. If it is the Hong Kong flu, then that flu came out of Hong Kong. So very often you will see the name of the region or the animal that it came from attached to the flu because it doesn't have a scientific name. Only every living organism has a scientific name, and we know that viruses are not living. So with the flu this year, there was flu A and B, and I know that the vaccine actually covered 4 flu strains. The flu vaccine is given typically before the virus presents itself. Now with vaccines, and one thing I need to mention is that you usually hear the word attenuated with vaccine because attenuated means that the flu, the influenza, has either been chemically treated or it's been heat treated, and then it's injected into you, and you start building up your little antibodies, which I typically think is ninjas. You start building them up, and then if you're ever faced with the flu, then you've got your antibodies all built up and you can fight the best you can. People that have compromised immune systems, and everybody from time to time does, we don't get enough rest, you're up late studying, you've got a lot of sports going on. Those things can compromise your immune system, as well as if you have something medically going on. And many of you do. Many of you have got something medically. Some of us in our later ages have got high blood pressure or diabetes, or we may have lupus or any arthritis. Any of those scenarios could cause our immune system to be a little bit down, and that just allows any of these viruses to sort of have a foot up or a good hold on us to infect us. So that's why we want to keep our immune system really strong, and I would suggest, especially at this point, you guys be taking some vitamin C and eating foods that are really loaded with vitamin C, your vegetables and your fruits, to help that immune system out. All right, back to influenza. So with the flu, we have so many different strains of it and have caught so many different flus in our lifetime that we have some sort of natural immunity to certain types of flu. So it may not bother me to get flu A, and it might bother someone else to get that flu because they don't have a natural immunity to it. The flu vaccine is the best help in guarding yourself against the flu because it is effective. Most of the time, they're pretty much on the mark as to how this strain is going to be handled. And I would suggest in the future that everybody get a flu vaccine. Even if you do get the flu, you should not get it as hard as it normally would without the vaccine. If you have got an allergy to eggs, the flu vaccine is actually injected into eggs, and this could be a problem for you. So maybe the nasal mist is more of an option, and of course, you would have to talk to your healthcare provider about that. All right, let's move on to smallpox. Smallpox, if you look over to the right, it says the greatest accomplishment in vaccination history. I do want you guys to go and look online at some pictures of people that have smallpox. It is hard in just reading through a PowerPoint to show you what these people look like. It is airborne, and we do have a vaccination for it, but the it's high fever, high fever. And when it says pustules on the skin, these pustules on the skin actually deformed the look of these people. They're not just, a blister here and there. It is a all over solid coating of blisters. It was very deforming, and it was fatal. So Edward Jenner noticed, now this is a pox virus. This is not a herpes virus, so this is going to fall into your category of pox viruses, and it's in there with cowpox, monkeypox. There's a bunch of them. But Edward Jenner was a doctor, and he, I think it was the 1700s, and he was only a doctor because he followed another doctor, and it was crazy, but back in the day, they didn't have medical schools. And so what he did was he was an apprentice to a doctor, and after a year or so, after following that doctor, he too became a doctor. And he noticed that this group of women that were the milkmaids for these cows never came down with cowpox, or they had a natural immunity to it for some reason. And that when they were faced with smallpox, either they got a very mild case of it or they didn't get it at all. So he thought, well, there must be some sort of correlation between the cowpox and the smallpox. So he took their blood and he took the antibodies and he processed it, and he decided to have a vaccine for it. Well, there's no test group for this vaccine. Okay, it was 100% fatal. People were pretty ignorant about medicine as it was. He lived in this huge house, and his family lived in the back, and all the other rooms in the house were hospital rooms. So he had to isolate his family from the rest of the house, but he decided that he wanted to test this vaccine out on his family. And of course, his wife had a heart attack and said, no way. And he snuck into his son's bedroom in the middle of the night, his 18-month-old son, and gave his 18-month-old son the vaccine. And thank goodness it worked. So when it worked, then he could start issuing the vaccine to everybody else, and it completely eradicated smallpox from the face of the earth. And that's why it is called the greatest accomplishment in vaccination history. I do want you guys to go online, read a little bit about smallpox, and look up some pictures. I would show you these if I were in class, but I do want you to see how deforming smallpox actually was and how serious it was. So I'm going to stop right there, and we will pick up again with infectious hepatitis.